One day on Earth, a tree with golden light made roots. It was given the name Hydrasil, and at one moment, it grew to an unprecedented size and encompassed all the living beings that surrounded it. Then, it created a new world based on different genres of games. Thanks to Hydrasil, a world called the Labyrinth was created, which contained many different mysteries and secrets. The people of this world called it by their own name, the Game of God, although not everyone could become a player in it. After all, there were also common workers who worked hard, and at that moment, they were warned through the loudspeaker that if they took something for themselves without asking again, they would be immediately fired. Not all the employees liked this statement. Instead of nicknames, each had their own number, and one of the workers, after finishing work, approached 7017 and said that he had worked hard that day. He also added that they hadn't had nice things for a long time, so he offered to buy this thing at a very good price. That is, this small data transmitter. But the worker immediately warned that it wasn't made with real data, and there was a small risk that it could be discovered. But this didn't mean it was less effective. However, 7017 wasn't interested, and simply pushed the worker and left without saying a word, which was very disappointing for him. But he still understood that this guy was just an unknown newcomer. People often said behind his back that he was just like everyone else. Usually after work, 7017 people walked through the streets of this unusual city, which were filled with homeless people who only did what they could to beg for food. There was a guy approaching a random store. Upon opening the door, the discontent of the visitors could be heard, with words about returning their points. There, people spent their time playing slot machines, hoping to win prizes. The guy also came there to play because that miraculous machine gave out everything that existed in that world. Its name was Rat Ni Yasha. When the guy approached him, he greeted him and recognized him as an unknown player. 7017 knew that legal games attracted people because, with their help, one could quickly get rich. That's why he decided to try his luck. SS Rank Account Creation Card. When asked if he wanted to spin the 10, the guy immediately and decisively said that he was ready because it was his only hope. With vibrant music and bright animation, the prize began to drop in front of him, of rank N. And since the guy wasn't interested in it at all, he simply continued. Time passed, and the unnecessary objects he eliminated filled the space more and more behind him. Again and again, he failed, because all the objects that dropped were of rank N. After some time, he even managed to win a level R prize. But he still didn't care about that because he would be happy just to get an SR or SSR rank item. The guy couldn't even remember how many times he had already tried his luck, but he still hoped to get that rare item. The only thing he saw before his eyes was his mother, which is why he tried to delete this item. Suddenly, for a second, his eyes froze with incomprehensible sparks, all because a very bright light began to emanate from the random box screen. He couldn't even imagine that the same SR item could appear in front of him. After all, the probability of that happening was 1 in a million. Saw the SSR prize. The boy was surprised to see that there was an SSR in front of him, because at first it seemed to him that it was an object of rarity. SSR, the one he had in front of him, previously thought he would never be so lucky, as it was difficult for him to imagine such a miracle, even in dreams. However, thanks to his persistence and perseverance in carrying the matter through to the end, he was generously rewarded. A card that allowed him to create an account in the magical labyrinth Yggdrasil. That's where he could use it, and there was only one way to access that place. This was to use the game account avatar to enter another reality. An avatar was a virtual body that never appeared in the real world, but this method was the only way to transport objects from the labyrinth to the outside world, and the objects from the virtual world, going beyond the limits of reality, were what changed his world. After that, shuttle trade became completely dependent on Yggdrasil, and the players who led their time were important representatives of society. But this qualification was not within everyone's reach, only a limited number of people. So, the boy ran as fast as he could with joy. After all, he got the opportunity to become a player, and now he could start from scratch. All he had to do was register his account in the central zone. Suddenly, just as he was about to do this, he woke up on the ground. He didn't understand what had happened and why he was lying down. And at that moment, the sounds of some people were still heard asking their boss if that was the right guy. The boss said it was precisely the one they needed because in front of them was a lucky guy who had drawn an SSR object, but his people thought that maybe the guy had been unlucky because they managed to catch him. One of the athletes said that it was indeed him who had the ability to create an account, and thought it was a good find for the night. The boss himself was surprised, for before he had only seen this on lists. But now he was pleased because the card was his, and now he could do what he had long desired. Suddenly, the boy at his feet said words in which he demanded the return of his card. The boss told this stranger that he was a liar and that the card did not belong to him. And then he asked his men to do their job. Even in such a difficult moment for the boy, he kept demanding the return of what belonged to him. But the boss's men were completely indulgent with him and never gave him the answer he wanted. But that didn't stop him from continuing to demand and standing firm. At that moment, the boss's guards were wondering if this boy really planned to start a new life. The boss told him that if he bought something from someone else's store, he had to pay a commission, placing his finger on the guy's forehead. Suddenly, he began to emit a magical impulse, after which he added that he had made an honest deal with the guy, and to get the card, he had to transfer 30,000 points to this guy's account. Then the guy was doomed because he understood that this thing could only be removed once. The boss said that the transfer of funds was complete, and since the boy accepted it, he could do whatever he wanted from that moment on. After that, the boy decided to lie down for a while at that moment. From the background, you could hear these people who didn't understand what had happened with the weather, and they were also deciding to organize a celebration banquet in honor of the acquisition of a valuable object. Suddenly, for a second, the guy moved his hand. Then, the athlete noticed something else and told his boss, saying that this guy still hadn't learned his lesson. The boss was very surprised to be able to stand up after that. At that moment, the boy received a warning that his vital signs had dropped, so he had to quickly visit the nearest medical center. But he ignored it and just kept watching those offenders who had exchanged their item. Seeing this, the boss didn't understand why this fool behaved like that. Maybe he wasn't satisfied. But suddenly the guy walked away from them and began to walk towards the random box shop, which greatly surprised the boss. His workers suspected he was planning to get another SSR rarity item, which was impossible. They yelled from behind that they wanted to make another deal if he drew another card. The athlete wondered what they would do if something happened to that guy, but the boss thought nothing would happen to them because the guy wasn't an influential person. Meanwhile, there was still a sign in front of him indicating that his vital signs were low. At that moment, he really felt, to put it mildly, not very well while walking towards the shop. His head was spinning, and all the people around him seemed blurry, but no matter what, he still intended to take what was his. As soon as the machine greeted him, an awkward moment occurred because the guy fell to the ground. However, his hand was still trying to reach the start button. He pressed the gotcha button over and over again to do it again, but then he got discouraged, seeing more and more unnecessary objects in front of him. He still had in front of his face the warning sign of low numbers that hadn't yielded good results. Suddenly, the boss was covered by a flash of light that came from the Yggdrasil tree, which surprised him because he didn't understand what was happening. Due to the emergency situation and the critical condition of the owner, extreme measures were taken to save his life, and then the forced transformation of the symbols began, after which the system asked to enter the character's name. The man found himself in total darkness and felt as if he were in front of a tribunal, which surprised him. He didn't understand why he was being handcuffed, as he hadn't committed any crime. Then a voice from the darkness said that he had been expelled from the guild for leaking confidential information. He got angry and started justifying himself, saying that couldn't be, and that they had confused him with someone else. But from the darkness, only the words came that by the court's decision, he was declared guilty, so they wanted to strip him of such a legendary title. Suddenly, the boy realized that something was wrong with his voice. The two ghosts that appeared congratulated him and said this was only the beginning of his unknown life. The boy thought it was unfair and wanted to appeal the decision because he hadn't done it. The only thing he could think of was how he needed to earn enough money to pay for his mother's surgery. Suddenly, a voice from the darkness told C7 that it was time to wake up. In the blink of an eye, the boy suddenly moved to a place. He didn't understand what that bright and at the same time damp place in front of him was. 7017 considered it some kind of fantasy and still didn't understand how he had gotten there. Suddenly a system appeared in front of him which scared the boy. However, it asked him to enter the name of your character. The guy was stunned to see that thing flying and assumed it was a vacuum robot, which it wasn't, and she considered it a rude comment towards her. She said it was the random box system of Yan, after which she congratulated the boy for becoming her master. After all, 7017 was the only one in the world who could achieve the URR rank. Upon hearing this, he was surprised because previously, the boy thought that gacha rarities were limited only to the ranks NR, SR, and SRR, but it turned out to be completely false, and he was the only one who knew it. The system reported that he was currently between reality and the world of Yggdrasil. and the reason it needed the master's name was to complete the registration and gain access to the labyrinth. The guy knew that to register, an avatar created with a game account was necessary, and that this limit of human technology had nothing to do with him. The system said that because he was a master in a critical state, she had to use her power to help him, and now he was in a state where his body voluntarily transformed to access Yggdrasil. Then she asked her master once again to enter the name of his character. The boy still couldn't understand if it was a dream or if everything was really happening, but no matter what, he realized that this was his opportunity. He finally entered his name, which sounded like Ryuki, and after the setup was completed, a bright glow appeared in front of him again. Then the system announced they were going to enter the labyrinth. When access opened, Ryuki saw the labyrinth with his own eyes for the first time. The expanses were unusually beautiful and were called a fantasy world. For the first time in a long time, the boy felt a pleasant breeze in his hair and also firm ground beneath his feet. He was incredibly happy because the simulations he saw on the monitor could never compare to that landscape. Immediately after such a pleasant moment, the boy noticed a group of ghostly skeletons moving toward him. Ryuki certainly didn't think that upon arriving in the new world, he would be greeted like this. He started running because what other options could a guy with no training have? He thought it was a rude act by the system to throw him into the battlefield like that. The skeletons were level 1, undead whose bodies no longer existed, but malice had infiltrated their bone marrow, though they were still weak to physical attacks. However, for Ryuki, it was a disaster, and the boy began calling the status window, which appeared, asking the master not to bother him because it was too embarrassing. Ryuki wanted to know about the weapon because he thought it should have come with him when he became a player. The system reported that the master was not a specific player of the labyrinth, so his other systems, including this one, were not applicable to him. In other words, the boy simply couldn't obtain the level, status, and many other things from the fantasy world. Upon learning this, the boy didn't understand why everything worked so strangely. The system told him that this labyrinth was on a completely different level. And here, you had to spin a random box to get something after entering the Yugen system. The boy read the rules, which stated that if he entered every day for a week, he would receive an SN level ticket. It also reported that the speed of item emission in the fantasy world of Uryuana's achievements, he had completed one for which he was entitled to a reward in the form of a ticket to the labyrinth, and among the accessories, there was a reward of 5 tickets. And just for completing this registration, the boy received no less than 105 tickets, so he immediately began to use everything to increase the chances of getting something rarer. He really wanted to believe that it would happen because there was an army of skeletons behind him. Suddenly, a shiny object appeared in his hands. Ryuki happily stopped and told the skeletons to attack. He hoped that their bones would fall into the broth like ramen, but suddenly one of the skeletons easily broke his object, which was obvious because he was holding an N-ranked toilet brush in his hands. The guy was so excited that he didn't even look at the item that dropped and was upset with such random boxes. He blamed everything on the system because it was its fault that there were so many unnecessary items in the boxes. But the system was just surprised in response. It didn't even understand how, being at the UR rank, it was possible to pull something like that. It considered him a loser. While the enemies were approaching, the guy kept opening random boxes, and again he got a strange item in the form of an N-ranked wig. By the way, it was a good way to hide his baldness, and while Ryuki was focused on the valuable item falling, the system couldn't help but warn him to watch where he was stepping. Unfortunately, it said it a little too late, and the boy was slightly injured. Meanwhile, the ghostly skeletons had already managed to catch up to him, which didn't make him happy at all. Unexpectedly for him, the box next to him began to emit a bright glow. This was exactly what he needed. An R-level short sword, with which the guy immediately began to defend himself. After so many attempts, he was glad to have finally gotten something normal. Now he had no intention of running away, but immediately got down to business. Ryuki was more than confident that he could defeat them all without any sword-fighting experience, but the attacking skeleton didn't think the same when it pierced his shoulder, which surprised the guy because he thought it should have worked. He realized that the skeleton's health should have been destroyed in just 2 hits, but the short sword's power wasn't enough for that. The system decided to remind him that the master couldn't use the labyrinth system, and that combat ability, as well as health, were no exceptions. The boy was increasingly disappointed with the system because it had already told him everything at the wrong time more than once. He didn't understand how, with such a wonderful opportunity in his life, he could have ended up like this. These thoughts didn't give him hope. On the contrary, they only motivated him to win. Not even the fact that he was cornered could stop him, So he repelled the attack and was determined to face them all. Suddenly, something really surprised him, namely that a bright glow appeared behind him. It was a skill. And then Ryuki realized that skills could also drop from random boxes, but he was confused by the fact that they didn't exist in the fantasy world. He received an SR rank of parry, which allowed him to block attacks, and an SR rank of sword mastery, which meant that when he had it equipped, he could master the sword. The system, always on time, said that this random yawn box wasn't subject to any system restrictions. In other words, even skills could drop. Then the boy thought he had been lucky because anything could have happened. This was the first time he used the sword stop skill. The wig fell off the skeleton, which worried him so much that he tried to catch it. But he no longer needed this since Ryuki's attack cut him in half. And by the way this was done precisely with the help of the mastery and sword skill, the boy was stunned by the fact that he was the one who could freely use skills that did not exist in the labyrinth system because he was allowed to ignore its laws and restrictions. For the first time, the system praised him and said that this was the balance of Yggdrasil. She was surprised and said that she had not doubted him from the beginning. After all, he was the person who managed to obtain the rank. U Rank also reported that he managed to obtain an item of rank SSR on the first day. Now, finally, a smile appeared on Ryuki's face because luck was on his side, so he was no longer worried that another mistake could happen at that moment. Meanwhile, there were already several skeletons attacking him behind him. Turning around, Ryuki decided to take advantage of the opportunity offered by the new object and defeat them all in one blow. It was World of Phantasm, abbreviated as WAP. Where was the masterpiece of the gaming industry of the production company Ratia, whose objective was that absolutely all players occupied first place in the labyrinth? At this point, Ryuki was still fighting the skeletons, and then a magic core fell from one of them, which, by the way, the boy did not notice immediately, and he, having already defeated them all, began to content himself with his first victory. The system reported that 7 skeletons had been killed, and that 5 magic cores had fallen. Moreover, the experience points obtained turned into RP, that is random box points. The guy did not quite understand how it worked. And then the system told him that they were used instead of experience, since the master still did not have a leveling system. After calculating, the guy was surprised because a skeleton was worth 150 RP, and he destroyed up to 15 of them. Then the boy remembered that he had one last box left, from which an SSR level card fell every time Ryuki was more and more surprised. And then the system wondered if the master still could not believe in this reality after all. If it was so much for him, then he was not worthy of such a reward. Ryuki said that. He wanted this box to be closed for a while, which surprised the system and wanted to know why he decided that at that moment, the boy thought about the fact that he could destroy his guild with such power. And until then, he decided to keep this power a secret. A system enhancement was launched that offered to increase his sword skill using his 700 RP. The effect of this would activate when repelling an enemy attack. The rest of the boy's skills were at the initial level. As Ryuki had 700 RP skill points, he thought he could take a detour to encounter the skeletons again. And he was right, because there were twice as many as last time. This time he was glad to see them, because he wanted to quickly improve his skills. Time was key for this boy when fighting. This time he did get excited in the fight, because from the outside, it looked terrifying. During this time, the system reported that it was the 3rd day of entering WAP. He managed to complete many missions, such as defeating 10 monsters spinning in gacha and obtaining 10 elements thrown by the monsters, for which he received tickets for all the tasks. He realized that time in the labyrinth passed 10 times faster than in reality, and that was only 7 hours during which he managed to obtain 1,500 RP, which he considered a pretty good result. The system was pleasantly surprised, because the master managed to obtain 10 gachas in a row in the training ground, and all this time she had been buzzing like a vacuum robot about how he got the gacha. At that moment, Ryuki was already thinking about the fact that he needed to improve his sword skills, and his stop skills also needed to be improved. Suddenly, the system screamed in surprise, not understanding what the master was doing. She simply could not believe that he spent his valuable RP on some skills, to which the boy responded that the skill system was also his ability. Then, he was curious to know what the probability was of the ranks appearing, and then the system gave the following indicators. Rank N 70%, rank R 2%, SSR rank 2 and 7%, and SSCR only 1 and 0.3%. Suddenly, Ryuki began to complain, showing the results of all the tickets he had recently received as rewards, and all were garbage. but the system just wondered if he had managed to win SR and SSR. With the first tickets, the system started asking his master to give him the points that the man had worked so hard to earn because he needed them more than the tickets. The man only replied that the tickets were enough to open a new box. Then the system asked him how long he planned to stay in that forest. After all, since the area was for training, the quality of the monsters he was fighting was low. The guy replied that he needed a weapon, and that his skill levels were not sufficiently developed, and he was proud to know more about WAP than anyone. That's why Ryuki believed he should have used all his information to level up in the forest, since there were opponents that matched his level, but there were also disadvantages, because this area was one way, which the boy could not return from. If he left the forest, he was curious to see how far he could advance, without adjusting his level and state, and also mentioned that he could get an SR rank ticket for a more serious mission. After a while, the boy received an entry bonus for the 7th day in the form of an SR ticket. Ryuki finally wanted to level up, so he found another skeleton and defeated it. At that moment, his skills were as follows. The sword handling had increased to level 3. The stop was exactly the same as the attack advance, but the temporary improvement in reflexes was only at level 2. Ryuki believed that was the limit of the skill he could achieve there, so he was thinking about moving to the next stage. The system reminded him that it was time to open a new box at random, to which the boy agreed. Still, he thought it was just his luck, and hoped that when he confirmed the SR, he would not receive something common and ordinary. When the box opened, it shone so brightly that its light filled all the space. Ryuki assumed that there was something incredible before him. What could be called a WAP truck obtained an SR-level sword gun. The type of weapon was a bayonet, and in the boy's opinion, it completely destroyed the vision of the world of this game. He immediately began to put it into action to see the power he was capable of. It turned out that with a single blow, he was able to destroy a tree whose trunk was enormous. Even considering his skill, the guy considered that the weapon was quite powerful, and she liked a lot the fact that the blade was long because it was hard to fight with the first. Suddenly, she was very interested in the question. What would happen if she died there, if her body transformed? Would something happen to her in real life? The system responded that if something happened to the master, she could revive him using the backup copy of Yggdrasil. However, it warned beforehand that this process would be very painful. Upon hearing this, the boy became happy, and this supposed process did not scare him at all. After that, he said he wanted a gacha for all the remaining tickets, since he wanted to improve his fighting power. This time, he got something he could use. It was a set of leather armor of R rank. Suddenly, Ryuki decided to ask about the fact that the system skipped his training and sent him immediately to hunt in its defense. The system said it was a training ground, and although it messed up the coordinates, it sent him to the system, which the boy considered fair. And as he was already more advanced, he asked the system to record all his achievements in the game. From that moment, she wondered if he had a desired name for the files. Then the guy told her to call it The Story of an Escape, nameless from the depths of the sea, but wondered what the purpose of the first video was. After all, Hidari created a more exquisite labyrinth than the originals that absorbed. Although most of the Rachia games were mass-produced and were full of all kinds of nonsense, they said it was worthy work as far as this place was concerned. While walking, the boy remembered something, namely that the boss of the second half of the game could appear in an early area. That was exactly what happened, and this giant appeared right in front of the man. The system reported information about the enemy, saying that in front of him was the Dark Knight of Chaos. After receiving the blessing of the demonic god of chaos, he was waiting for the strongest opponents in his tower. The system gave the boy a mission in which he had to face this ghost of the Dark Knight, which would reward him with 10 Yugon tickets and a Yugon ticket. Mr. Rank was unexpected for Ryuki, but he even liked it because the experiment started from that moment. Suddenly, the Demon Knight presented himself with a threatening voice and said that he was looking forward to seeing a strong man, after which he attacked the guy because he was interested in what he was capable of doing. Thanks to such an unusual sword, the boy was able to withstand such a strong opponent. Then he remembered that he had a parry skill that was already at level 3. Then he confirmed his theory that if he managed to successfully parry the blows, he could ignore the difference in attack power and level. And although he had such an unusual sword and skills, even with such abilities, it was difficult. After all, this was not enough, since it was his first encounter with such a majestic boss. He did not understand why his attack was not working. After all, he thought he could do it if the system did not affect him. And then he began to think about how he could break his defense. The system noticed that this was an excellent assumption, because the master could ignore the correction of the Wopi system. The guy was confused because he thought it could not be effective. The system went crazy and started telling the guy that he was stupid, and then asked him to think a little about the idea that had occurred to the master. Ruki wondered if his sword could compete with a metal armor. Different while fighting, he still wondered what would happen if his assumptions were correct. Then he should have aimed at the hardest points to reach, which were the weakest. Seeing that this guy was plotting something, the Dark Knight began to attack even harder. The boy could only stop this powerful blow suddenly due to the crossing of the blades. A spark was formed that gave that same wick the additional characteristic of the type's weapon, with which he attacked the ghostly Dark Knight, which was one of the strongest blows of this battle. Who deprived the Dark Knight of his limbs after having suffered, could only sob with pride. The guy knew that in the labyrinth, health was the system. In other words, being a Yugon player, the guy would not have said it was so because the damage could be inflicted on the enemy himself. And if he aimed at vital points, then he could not only wound the ghostly knight, but also defeat him with a single blow. If he had more strength, the system warned the boy that it was dangerous, after which something pierced him. He was not prepared for this because the boy did not expect that the Dark Knight could have long-range attacks. Upon turning around, he noticed that a sinister energy emanated from his limb, the same that had pierced him here. The Dark Knight said that demons were fierce creatures that posed a threat to God, after which he wanted the boy to experience his despair. From his wound and from his X began to emerge a dark matter that surrounded the boy from all sides. As he did not know how to combat dark magic, the guy had to dodge it. It was then that the boy realized that this was a bad idea, because the Dark Knight was the boss of the second half of the game and was impossible to defeat during training. Furthermore, if you die in that place, it will be impossible to return. After all, even if the player's level increases, he still cannot return, which means he cannot win. Furthermore, no one has ever seen the second phase of the Dark Knight. At that moment, he had too many attacks to stop. Suddenly, the system realized that its master was in danger. After all, the Black Knight pierced him with his dark matter. Ruki screamed and hit the table with his palm, unable to believe it. He was talking about how someone had rejected his strategic plan again and couldn't understand what the problem was at that moment, as he was Lindsay Guild's expert analyst. The director then looked at the strategy guide that had been provided, but he knew that Rinf had rejected it earlier, to which the boy responded that it was much more effective than before, so he wanted it to be accepted. After throwing them the provided strategy guide, the boss told him that he was not even a player but a person of ordinary rank, so he should think of something better. Ruki realized that the recapture did not suit his boss, and then resigned himself to the fact that it was the will of the ace of his guild. But suddenly he got angry because he was sure that the boss would not reject Rinf, and so he decided to vent his anger by punching the table. After all, he could not understand how it was possible that there was no recapture, and then he realized that it was no longer worth listening to Rin at all. The first thing he wanted to do was calm down, as he needed to make money for his mother's operation, so he began to correct the management records, thinking the guild would promote him from behind him, whispering his name. This girl startled him, though it was not her intention, as she had only brought him coffee, thinking that his tired appearance needed it. The name of this girl was Cynthia. She was a guild investigator. Lindsay, the boy, was very grateful to her for the care she showed. The girl noticed he was editing the manual that had been rejected several times. Cynthia thought he was paying it too much attention, which worried her because she was concerned for him, and she truly wanted to help with it. But before that, she asked if he was against it. Ruki happily showed her the last part of the strategic manual, but since it was very secret, he had to inform his superiors about it and request the materials for the required part, something the girl had no qualms about doing, as she desired to help him. She was even pleased, as it was a good reason to communicate. The boy asked his mother not to be surprised, because he had finally been given a date for the operation. She was surprised because she didn't understand where the funds came from for this. Ryuki replied that she should not worry about that because his strategic plan had been accepted. This time, his mother was very happy to hear this. The boy said that it was all thanks to Cynthia, after which they hugged, and his mother told him she was incredibly proud of him. Ryuki told her not to worry. However, his efforts had been rewarded, and the boy had previously been told that he was being dismissed for the offense of revealing secret information from the guild, which was why he was fired from Lindsay. The guy was surprised and didn't fully understand what they were referring to, but the authorities informed him that all the evidence had been collected, despite the fact that he had acted very cunningly, and if Cynthia hadn't reported him, no one would have noticed. When the boy heard her name, he was very surprised because this girl wanted to help him. Suddenly, one of the people expressed their discontent with this meeting because they didn't understand why they were wasting time on this. This was the same Renel Darius, who was the deputy master of the Lindsay Guild. He never thought that in that meeting he would have to meet Ryuk, who constantly published manuals that irritated him enormously. After all, Reinfeld had always been curious about who this fool was, as he almost went crazy when he saw the last publication. Then Rinf told Cynthia that it would be inappropriate for her to communicate with a guy like that, and he also added that, as he had previously promised, he would be her support, after which he invited the girl to celebrate this matter. Approaching Ryuk, Reinfeld said that he didn't understand at all the essence of his work, but if he was really an analyst, then his analysis was